IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Aditya Pareek. Space is a vital part of the cross-domain modern battlefield. During the Cold War, the USSR was a pioneering space power, and its successor state, the Russian Federation, has inherited much of its grandeur and capabilities. To discuss the various strategic dimensions of Russian space power, today I have with me Dmitry Stefanovich. Welcome, Dmitry.
Hello, and I'm very happy to be here, and I hope I'll contribute to your podcast.
Dmitry Stefanovich is a research fellow at the Center for International Security, Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations. He is an expert with the Russian International Affairs Council and a non-resident fellow with IFSH Hamburg. His main research interests are disruptive technologies challenging strategic stability and the logic behind the development and deployment of new strategic weapons. He has written articles on global security, strategic stability, nuclear weapons, and military applications of emerging technologies. To begin with, let me ask you, Dmitry, can you give us a brief overview of Russia's strategic space-based capabilities and how they fit into Russia's national goals across domains? Science tech, Arctic HADR, and above all, national security.
Oh, well, that's a great question, and we can focus on it for hours and hours. I'll just put these capabilities in several baskets. First and foremost is the capability to actually launch things into space, the space launch assets. And currently, Russia possesses both the space launch vehicles and the spaceports and all the necessary infrastructure to control that the space vehicles actually do what they must. We have the military cosmodrome or spaceport in Plesetsk. We have newly built Vostochny cosmodrome in the Russian Far East, which will be used for next generation of space launch vehicles. And we also have the venerable Baikonur in Kazakhstan, probably the first spaceport on the Earth's surface. All three are operational, and they are used to launch both Russian as well as foreign payloads to space, to different orbits, and so on. We have a next generation of space launch vehicles under development, the so-called Angara, and also the Soyuz family is continuously developed and upgraded. So in this domain, things are rather okay, if I may. Although, of course, the pressure from the new players in the field, like SpaceX and others, is there. And it is a good thing because Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, is forced to be more active in achieving new capabilities and developing new products. Next, we have quite sophisticated space situational awareness system, or as it is called in Russia, the space control system, the SKKP. It is used to monitor everything that goes on in the outer space. It is closely connected to the Russian early warning and missile defense assets as well. And most importantly, the space control system is fully ground-based at the moment with radars and telescopes, but there might be some plans recently disclosed to develop even on-orbit capabilities for space situational awareness. Then we have the satellite constellations. Of course, I believe everyone heard about the GLONASS, the Russian global navigation system, which is operational, and now it is undergoing the switch to the next generation of satellites. And we have the number of Earth imaging or remote sensing satellites. Although at the moment we have some issues with the so-called radar imaging satellites, there are some optical imaging satellites on orbit, but the radar imaging satellite, which name is Condor FKA, is still on the ground. We expect this launch in a year or two. So it will contribute greatly to the capabilities. And also, as was recently disclosed, a program of radar imaging satellites in the so-called mini satellite category is under development, and it will have purely civilian purposes, including the monitoring of the Northern Sea route in the Russian Arctic. Let's see how it goes, because it seems like a very useful capability. Russians providers of space services, of satellite imaging and so on, are very active in cooperation with the Russian governmental agencies, the Ministry for Emergency Situations, the ministries in charge of nature, of transport, and so on. But my personal perception is that while some capabilities are used for civilian purposes, there is a lack of coordination and integration of all these capabilities. And my personal sadness relates to that we still do not have any services like Planet or Maxar or these fantastic commercial satellite imaging providers. Although sometimes some Russian companies advertise similar capabilities and even show some high quality images, it's not what is desired. Next, of course, is actual military space satellites that can be used for communications, for early warning, and for targeting. Now we have completed the first stage of the development of the so-called Joint Space System, or the ECS, based on Tundra satellites. There are 4 of those using high elliptical orbits, and at least as declared, they monitor continuously all so-called missile threat active regions of the Earth's surface continuously without delays. But as the name suggests, this ECS, this Joint Space System, is also used for communications, and it might complicate things a bit in case of conflict, if you know what I mean. But nevertheless, it is a great achievement, because Russia lost the space layer of the early warning system around a decade ago, and completion of the first stage of ECS is a major achievement to ensure the security and, predictability of the security environment around Russia. Because, of course, it's coupled with the development of the ground-based layer of the early warning radars. The Voronezh radars are covering all of the Russian border territories. But, as you know, the early warning system needs to have both the ground layer and the space layer to provide a good enough information about possible missile and the rocket launches that might threaten the territory, the homeland. What is actually very important, especially given the development of more and more sophisticated long-range conventionally armed missiles, including hypersonic missiles and anti-ship missiles, is that we need radar space-based targeting capabilities. Such system was developed back in the days of the Soviet Union. Now a next generation of Liana and Pion and these families of satellites are being developed and deployed to space. And it is considered to be a major asset that will ensure that weapons like the well-known Zircon hypersonic sea-based missile and the likes can be used to their full capability. because if we speak about ranges of hundreds of kilometers or even 1,000 of kilometers, you need the only way to achieve targeting on this range is to use space-based assets. Okay, I think these are the major areas of Russian strategic space capabilities. And as a final note on that, there are efforts directed in all of these domains, but at the same time, there is a lack of integration, and the continuous shifts to the right, as it is called. I mean, there are continuous delays in development and deployment of different systems.
Interesting. So, Russia in the modern day is just looking at its own capabilities, but it also has alliances with other countries for strategic purposes. So, my next question is, what is your take on Russia's collaboration with China, particularly in the International Lunar Research Station ILRS program? As of now, neither the US-led Artemis Accords or ILRS have an exclusivity clause to them, but they are competing projects and blocks in the geopolitical sense. So what's your take on it?
That's a very interesting dynamics we're having there. And I think the major differences between the Russia-China Lunar Space Station project and the Artemis Accords led by the US is that in our case, we are looking at actual partnership, and there are no leaders and followers, while the Artemis Accords are by design the process of bringing countries on board with the American project. Of course, both Russia and China, and I think India as well, consider themselves to be a major powers that have to be equal partners with any other space in any space project, not the follower of some leader who enjoys superiority both in capabilities and in decision making. At the same time, this International Lunar Station project is open, but it is still in early stages of development. So it remains to be seen how far will it go actually. I would also mention that there is ongoing debate, or even not a debate, but even design work on the so-called Russian National Space Station that might come into being after the International Space Station will be considered no longer feasible to operate. So again, it remains to be seen whether this project will be Russian only or with other partners. There were some rumors that in case of Russia-China partnership on a future space station, there are more questions than answers, and the Chinese are not that eager to participate on Russian terms. So yes, these international projects are a tricky thing, because although space is huge and enormous, and due to the laws of physics, the spacecraft and objects in space cover all Earth's surface, the dynamics that happen on Earth's surface and geopolitical, political, military political rivalries, they indeed affect how things are going in space, both in terms on which countries can achieve partnership, and at the same time, what are the priorities of these or that countries for different projects in space.
Intriguing. So coming to India-Russia space cooperation, since you mentioned, India also sees itself as a major power and would rather be a part of equals than be led by somebody else. So Roscosmos Director General Dmitry Rogozin said in June this year at a Duma hearing that they're not able to procure certain microchips due to Western sanctions, because of which some satellites remain unfinished and can't be launched. Is there a way India and perhaps China can serve as suppliers for such components?
Yes, you've mentioned a very serious challenge, and it is one of the reasons why many projects are being delayed, because obviously at the moment no country in the world can achieve 100% domestic production of all components and for all of their machinery. weaponry and spacecraft. So due to the Western sanctions, Russia have to produce some stuff domestically, have to change the designs, because obviously when you begin the design process under one political situation, you use like the most sophisticated and the most modern components. Then you realize that you lost access to these components. You have to redesign your project and things like that. And in this case, the growing partnerships with India and China are definitely one of the ways to go with that. Of course, there are some domestically produced things. Of course, there are ways to smuggle some components. Then there are other producers like South Korea, like Taiwan, and probably even Japan. But if we speak about sensitive capabilities, if we speak about sensitive spacecraft, it gets even more complicated. So the fact that Russian officials openly mention these challenges, and that there are continuous search for other sources of these components and microchips and things like that, and even materials sometimes, is actually a good thing, because in the end, there will be less and less so-called monopolies in this domain in high-tech industries. And I believe that it is a good thing for the technological development of mankind, of all of our planet.
I wholeheartedly agree. And coming to the direct ongoing cooperation between India and Russia in the space domain. So Russia via Glavkosmos is currently training the crew for India's manned spaceflight program called Gaganyaan. But are there some projects/areas that you think India can help and in turn get help from the Russian space industry, both commercial and military projects?
Well, there is a huge hurdle before that have to be overcome before any actual projects involving especially rocket and missile development can come into being, is that we have missile technology control regime, and although both Russia and India are parts to that regime, we have to be very careful in terms of what projects we engage in to ensure that the civilian capabilities do not end up repurposed for military applications. So it's quite hard to foresee, for example, some joint development of a space launch vehicle. But at the same time, and I'm sure that the works in this domain actually are ongoing, is the development of the ground-based assets for control of space flight, of spacecraft, and things like that. I know that there are some projects of radar stations are being considered by India to be procured from Russia. Probably there might be some joint developments. We've seen, especially during the Indian anti-satellite test back in the day, and the information disclosed at the time, that there are plenty of sophisticated radars already deployed on the Indian territory to ensure the monitoring and operations in space. And I think Russia can contribute to that process, both in terms of actual technologies and facilities, but also in the organizational domain, on how to design the whole system. Because Russia has unique experience in that regard, especially given the fact that, unlike the US, we are also somewhat landlocked and need to focus on the capabilities deployed on our own territories, not on the territories of the overseas allies. So I believe this is the areas where Russia and India can cooperate and can achieve some mutually beneficial results. Also, I've mentioned Global Navigation System, the GLONASS, and it uses the ground-based stations that have to be distributed all over the world. And I believe here is also some room for cooperation between Russia and India. Again, if we achieve some, like the highest level of cooperation might be achieved if we agree on some sharing of information acquired through this or that space situational awareness assets that were deployed on Russian or Indian territories. And I think this is where Russia and India can also be leaders on a global domain, because on a global arena, because there are a lot of discussions and debates that we actually need some kind of joint international space situational awareness capabilities, simply because there are so many spacecraft these days, and not to mention space debris. And if some countries like Russia and India agree to begin development of such a system jointly, it will be a major breakthrough, and then other countries can be brought on board.
Fascinating. So I'd just like to mention the Zeus TEM nuclear space tug project, which Roscosmos is currently pursuing. So I think it is an edge that Russia has, that if India could collaborate on, possibly co-fund the development of, I think that would be a strategic space that if India can work with Russia, it would be a great thing.
Yeah, just a few words on that. This is indeed a fascinating project, and I'm looking forward to see how it goes. The problem is that it is yet unclear what will be the main purpose of this technology, of this nuclear space tug, whether it will be used for so-called civilian space or for military space. And in case of civilian space, I think it is quite possible that India might become a partner in this development. But if we speak about military purpose, then it might be more complicated.
Indeed, it remains to be seen what shape the project actually takes. The contract only got signed at the end of the last year. So now we'll take a short break, folks. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Paisa Vaisa with Anupan Atul Shingal, founder and CEO of Scriptbox, shares financial advice best suited for 25-year-olds. Our War and Culture podcast Yuddha is back with Season 2. Check out the first episode where Anirudh and Aditya take us back to the turbulent times of ruthless warlord Timur and his descendant Babur. Also, check out what Gautam Buddha did in the final hours of his life on Echoes of India with Anirudh. Chuck, Tony, Naren, and Shriketh break down the intriguing concept of a metaverse on Simplified. Need some help dealing with breakups? Tune in to the Say No to Drama feed and find out the alternative word Chetna has for heartbreak. And on Khel Niti, Rajiv, Rajkumar Sharma, and Ayaz Mendon analyze the lineup of the third test match between India and England. Do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you enjoyed this show or any of our shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Word of mouth is the best way to spread the word about a podcast. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week: Ciet Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and Intuit India. We really do appreciate the support. You are what makes this possible.
Welcome back, folks. We are discussing Russian space power with Dmitry Stefanovich. Now, Dmitry, coming to counter space capabilities and the gray zone. There is a bunch of hype around platforms like Brevetsnik and Nudol. Same also goes for directed energy weapons and electronic warfare platforms that can target objects in orbit. But is there a chance these weapons are in fact strategic in nature, a la strategic nuclear weapons meant only for credible deterrence?
I think it is a rather clever way to look at these systems, because I doubt that any actual conflict, like kinetic conflict in space that involves destruction of space assets, can go on without affecting the situation on the Earth's surface. And probably if we are already in the situation where we target each other's satellites, then there is already a hot war on the ground. Another important thing to consider in this regard is that there is a joint Russian-Chinese project of a treaty to prevent the deployment of actual weapons in space. And while on the one hand, we want to find a legal basis, a legal ban to deployment of weapons in space. On the other hand, there probably is a development of assets that will prevent such deployment the hard way, if you know what I mean. Of course, I hope this is not the scenario that will be unraveling in the future, and I hope that we will find some points of understanding between Russia, China, India, the US, and other countries in this regard. But still, like many countries are investing in anti-satellite capabilities, but those are definitely not the type of capabilities you use at peacetime. And not only because the destruction of satellites is a hugely escalatory move, but also because such destruction, it's next to impossible to foresee the consequences of such destruction because they generate debris, and this debris can in turn hit other spacecraft in orbit, and it might lead to a lot of unintended consequences. At the same time, if we speak about some jamming and dazzling, these things indeed happen almost all the time, and not only by major countries, but also by some small countries when they have some concerns or misunderstandings with regard of who operates which satellites here and there. So this is another area, but again, if there is no destruction of spacecraft, then probably it is considered to be something less escalatory. There is also a challenge of, as I mentioned, of deployment of weapons in space that can target other space systems, but also target things on the ground. And in case of Russia, one of the major concerns is that the increased space surveillance capabilities, and especially the ISR capabilities that can even provide some targeting data, can undermine the Russian strategic nuclear deterrent by providing continuous 24-hour monitoring of Russian territory, and especially the patrol zones of the road mobile ICBM launchers. This is considered a major threat, and while it's definitely not the case today or tomorrow, many people can consider a future where this will become a possibility simply because we have more and more of surveillance satellites, and the machine learning applications, machine learning techniques allow to process this huge amount of data, allow this so-called sensor fusion, but on a planetary scale. In this case, should the hostilities that can lead to nuclear use break out, probably one of the first steps would be to take out all of those satellites to prevent the disarming strikes from the adversaries. Again, I am like 90% or even 99% confident that it is not the future that any country would like to see, and like the US is not planning a disarming strike against Russia anytime soon, and vice versa. But well, military people are by design planning for the worst case scenarios, so their investments in all sorts of technologies, including the Pegasvet beta laser, so-called, at least judging from its deployment or co-deployment with road mobile ICBMs, and by some papers written by military scholars, it seems that its main mission is actually to prevent the satellites, the optical satellites, from providing targeting against those launchers. So it is a complicated area, and counter space capabilities are being developed by many countries. And probably the main challenge and main task for scholars like us is to look for solutions to at least keep these things manageable. Because, of course, banning counter space systems right away is not going to work. And not only because everyone considers these weapons extremely useful, but also because it's next to impossible to draw a line between the anti-satellite, for example, anti-satellite interceptors and missile defense interceptors. To draw a line between the ground-based radars that can provide targeting against incoming warheads or against the satellites that circulate on orbit. It's a fascinating topic, and unfortunately there are no easy answers these days. But one of the hopes is that it seems that there is a genuine interest both in Russian military space circles and in the US military space circles to at least draw down mutual concerns in this domain, and then probably some solutions can be achieved.
Fascinating. So, zeroing in on one of the counter space capabilities in orbit, specifically rendezvous and proximity operations. So, US and France say that Russian second capable satellites have snooped on their assets. Is there another side to this coin here?
Yeah, I've heard such rumors, but and claims. But probably my favorite statement was by one of the U.S. Space Force officials who mentioned that some actions by Russian so-called inspector satellites look not like satellites but like space torpedoes. But this is another story. Speaking about this spying by during RPOs, during rendezvous and proximity operations. I am 100% confident that all countries actually engage, all countries that have such capabilities engage in such operations. The question is how threatening those can be considered. Like spying is a trade that people engaged in since ancient times. And to say that it will not be a part of any domain is just to turn a blind eye on reality. So I think that while these concerns might be genuine, the better way to address it is not to go to the public and say that and accuse this or that country of malign behavior, but to actually engage in a proper consultations, proper government to government, track one consultations, and precisely discuss the operations that took place and you have concerns with. I am absolutely confident that if such engagement actually occurs, the Russian people in charge of space control will have a lot to share as well. And in the end, I'm absolutely sure that we have professionals in Russia, in France, in US, and everywhere in charge of space military operations who will find and achieve mutual understanding. But the only thing that we lack is the political will to actually achieve such understanding. Unfortunately, given the current state of international affairs and especially international military political affairs, it looks like there are too many stakeholders who like the conflict-based environment rather than cooperation-based environment.
I agree. So, for my final question, what is your impression of the various international initiatives for figuring out rules of the road, so to say, for spacefaring and exploration? Is an UNCLOS for space possible?
I think that UNCLOS for space is not around the corner or even not around the next corner. But the fact that now more and more countries not only speak about how good it would be to develop such rules, but actually engage in development of these rules and try to figure out the norms, norms of behavior, rules of engagement, propose actual measures, this is a good sign. But on the other hand, of course, legally binding regimes for any domain are better than simply norms-based approach. And again, I've also seen some signs that probably there is some room for both and to have the best of the both worlds. For example, like if we speak about so-called Western camp, like US, UK, and their allies, they are more into norms. Then we have Russia and China who are more into legally binding regimes. But it looks like, at least from my perspective and my impression from talking to officials, is that there is greater interest in understanding your counterpart. So now the Russian diplomats are more engaging and they participate in some events dedicated to space norms. And then we also see less aggressive language from Western officials about these Russian and Chinese initiatives. So there is probably growing interest in actually making this treaty draft as something, a reality. And also we have this another initiative by Russia, where Russia signs joint statements and joint declarations with many countries about no first deployment of weapons in space, which some people make fun of, because sometimes these declarations are being signed with countries that are, well, definitely not in a major league, in a major spacefaring league, and will probably never have their own space launch capabilities in the first place. But at the same time, well, we have United Nations as the major universal international organization. And when time comes and when the resolutions on this or that efforts to prevent the weaponization of space arrive to the General Assembly, or even some treaty drafts or some agreed norms, then those countries which already reached an agreement with Russia will probably stand beside Russian initiative. So, I think to put it simply, we are not yet reached the phase where actual law of space similar to the UNCLOS is possible, but at least some kind of a roadmap towards that goal can be developed in the next few years. At least that's what I hope for.
Fascinating. Thanks for this intriguing discussion, Dmitry. To our listeners, I'd like to confess that I have followed Dmitry on Twitter for a long time, and I'd recommend that you do the same. If you could just tell our listeners your handle.
Oh, yeah, sure. It's Commissar Vipla, or just look for my name. I think Google or any other search engine does fairly good job in figuring out my Twitter, because it might be a bit complicated to write it down. And many thanks for having me. I've enjoyed our conversation, and I hope our listeners learned something.
Indeed. On that note, folks, we will call it a wrap. If you like today's discussion, please do check out all past and future episodes of All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
A wise man once said, traveling, it makes you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller.
Well, listen to such travel stories and experiences exploring India on the Musafir Stories with us, Saif and Faiza.
Catch us on the IVM website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Season 3 of Echoes of India, your favorite history podcast, is back on the IVM Podcast Network. I'm your host, Anirudh Kanasetti. Join me on a journey through the wonders of early India as we explore the centuries between Buddha and Ashoka with critical research, empathy, and great storytelling. Along the way, you'll hear from all the vibrant peoples who shaped our world, from monks and farmers to warriors and emperors. New episodes are out every Monday.